Hi, everyone. Welcome to Real Talk Food Safety with Tia and Jill. We're excited to have you today and our
We
guest.
Yes, we are. We're excited to be here and we're excited to share our guest, Gillian.
Hi, everybody.
Hello, hello. So, if you've been here before, you know we can't actually see you. So, please put in the comments, say hello to us, and let us know what is the weather looking like where you are. I'm in Baltimore. You all know I'm in Baltimore, and today is a red air quality day because of all the
Oh,
wildflowers fires in Canada. So we were just kind of talking about our kids before we jumped on, but my daughter, her school, all the kids are staying inside because it's a bad air quality day today. So it's cloudy. It doesn't to your eyes, it doesn't look terrible, but we know some things are happening. So it's starting to make its way, south, which is
nice.
interesting. Are you all impacted there?
We're not in Florida. So
It doesn't make it all the way down
we're
there.
going all the way down, and we don't have any Saharan dust right now. So that's kind of
Ah,
our big thing. We usually have Saharan dust, and so
I
now
really,
we might have crazier hurricanes because of it.
oh, that's
Um,
interesting.
oh yeah, I did not even know that.
yeah. But it's a gray day in Jacksonville, Florida. Very muggy. It maybe highs in the mid to high 80s. So.
Okay,
Yeah.
nice,
Yeah.
nice.
It's a top 10 weather day here. It's beautiful. And granted, we've had some outfall from the wildfires as well, just because, well, clearly we're closer in Minnesota, but we've had it from the west and now coming from the east. So
Right.
it's always been interesting, but that's
Interesting.
okay. We'll take it.
That's right. That's right. Hello,
Yes.
Sarah. You're obviously not seeing the wildfires either in Southern California, but you all are having some gloom. Some gloom there. Okay.
Oh,
Laurel,
yeah.
hello. Todd, welcome. Welcome. Oh, in Philly, yes. That's me.
Oh, Todd, that's hilarious.
Hi, Todd.
That's funny.
Right? It's all about conditioning. So there's so many different ways.
That is awesome. Well, we are happy you all are joining us here today on World Food Safety Day, too,
Yeah.
right?
Woo.
Standards save lives. So I'm sure there's many posts about it. The post that I made today. Gillian, I don't know. Are you a Ted Lasso fan?
I am, yes.
Yes. So I made my post around Ted Lasso and like this whole idea around people, right? Like he came, I'm not telling any secrets. So if you haven't
Oh,
watched Ted Lasso, like I'm a big fan.
it's not a spoiler alert moment.
Not a spoiler alert, but he was an American football coach. He went, to London to be a football coach there, soccer football coach there. And what you'll notice is that, he focused so much on people. And that's really was the key to their whole success, their whole team, and how they grew over time. And so I really related that to standards, right? Like that we talk about all the time. Like we have to have standards, but really focusing on people, right? People following standards, people champion standards, people making sure that our standards are changing and moving, right? To how our business is growing is super important. And I think that falls within what we're going to discuss today, which we're talking a lot about quality. But people are doing these programs, right? People are living and breathing and solving problems every day. And if we're not focusing there, right, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what type of standards you have or how many plays you drill up, right? If the people aren't in sync, then you still have problems.
Well, and I always think it's interesting because I think, we've probably heard the argument both ways. One, food safety is not a quality attribute for a product,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, however you see it. There's others that say, you know what, food safety is a must have quality attribute. It just happens to be a product characteristic that
Mm-hmm.
also extends into a system, just like quality is part of a system.
Yeah.
So, but that's why it's great to have Gil with us today because and we'll do an introduction here, but I mean, you've traversed all of these areas and even more with sensory. And so I'm so excited for our audience to be able to first meet you, but then kind of learn and, get some insights from you. So
Yes, we're super
Yeah,
excited about it.
Yeah,
If
plenty of
you
chocolate.
Yes. If you're new here, we want to say hello and just say hello, Tia, Jill, Gil here today as our guest. And if you don't know who we are the co-founders of Catalyst, and we focus on food safety culture and people, right? We help organizations empower their technical experts to step into technical leadership. And we do that by putting people first. So we're excited for you to be here with us today, and we will turn it over to our topic.
Yes. So, okay, thank you for being here, Gil, and being our special guest.
Mhm.
We are so happy to have you here. And for those of you that don't know Gil, would you even start off and share a bit about yourself and kind of what got you into food and where are you today?
Yeah. So, hi everyone. My name is Gillian Dagan. I am a food scientist and businesswoman. What got me into food? I come from a really food obsessed family. We all love to cook. We love to eat. I always knew I wanted to be a scientist. And what I really fell in love with in food science is like the practicality and how much of the science is applied. I can walk through the grocery store and say like, I worked on that product, or I worked on this product, or I improved that one. And I feel like it's one of the more practical applied sciences, and I find that very, very rewarding. So my background is a PhD in food science, also MBA. I've been in testing, inspection, and certification for 20 years on the food and beverage side. And as Jill mentioned, I've kind of done the whole spectrum from food safety to food quality, also product development support with things like sensory and consumer insights. And I love it all. Absolutely love it all. And recently I launched my own consulting group, Food Improved Consulting Group, that is very focused on quality and sensory characteristics.
Well, congratulations on that. Woo! we know starting a business, I mean, that right, you got to jump in.
Yes.
And what I
Yeah.
love is that it's following your passion and
Mhm.
doing, because you're amazing. For those of you that don't know Gil, and you're brilliant and dynamic and seriously fun, which I know isn't all about being. You mean you're also highly qualified because you've done so much work in this area, and not just food safety and food quality, but even the aspects that you bring when it comes to integrating with businesses and being very like business savvy on what organizations need.
Yeah.
Yeah, I try to keep it practical.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but you also think very much bigger picture. I mean, even when you're thinking about like how these things all fit in with organizations, like what sparked your interest to go down that path and really dive into quality even further?
Yeah, so I mean, I've always been much more of a big picture person than necessarily the details, which is kind of odd because we might talk about like specifications today, which have all kinds of details. But really, I love building out systems. If you want to talk about like supply chain management, there are definitely food safety aspects of that are non-negotiables, right? So when you're talking about kind of what bucket do people put food safety in, I don't know. It's just classified under a non-negotiable portion in my book.
Mhm.
Quality also has it has a negotiable, but less negotiable position as well. I feel like quality also is tied into price point and cost and brand. And when you start looking at, you can have a pasta sauce that's a budget pasta sauce. It's formulated to be a lower cost option for the consumer, which means as the producer, I have to make it at a lower cost. And then you can have also a pasta sauce that is an incredibly high-end, gourmet. The branding is different, the packaging is different, the label feels different, the ingredients are going to be vastly different. Both have to be absolutely safe. But the way you define quality around those two, I think you do need to define quality, number one. But the quality stories are going to be, different ends of the spectrum, right? And I feel like I feel like a lot of it is just being able as a scientist, as a product developer, to put into words and numbers how you want people to experience your gold standard.
Yeah.
And that's not an easy thing to do.
It's not. But you're so right. And I don't think people think about this a lot, especially for their own brands. You know, I've worked with many startups, and as an owner, right, who most likely created this brand, you know, they are in tune with what they want the product to taste like and look like. But to translate that into metrics around quality is important. And then to make sure that your co-packer, right, if you're using a co-packer, or if you're manufacturing it yourself, what does that mean in terms of data collection, in terms of how do you respond to it? But then I love it that you brought up price as well, because a lot of people in your mind, you think, okay, higher quality, yes, it's going to cost it's going to cost more money. That's in all aspects of, you know, everything that we buy. But to really be able to relate that and say, okay, you want to be at this price point. This is what it actually means when it comes to quality and what you should look for and what the consumer ultimately is looking for because of the brand that you put out there is important. And I think sometimes we miss that. We miss that importance around quality. And then I think that separates into what's negotiable and what's not around quality.
Right. It's a balancing act. It is definitely a balancing act. And if you've ever shopped for anything on a budget yourselves, you know what the balancing act is between how much you can afford and kind of what you want.
Yes.
Well, and I think that's really interesting because even as we've all been in the industry for a while. So, you know, there are some specifications I've seen that are literally one page and it's very generic, right? Like color, taste, maybe odor. And you're like, how are you even measuring these things on some of these products? But then I've also seen the ones that are like a book where they are 10 pages long and extremely detailed to the point where you're like, how do we actually afford to measure all these things and what does that look like? So I'm really curious, you know, because you've done so much work in this area, like how do organizations, like what's the way, or what are the factors that need to be considered as you start thinking about specifications, having them be robust and how they fit with a good quality program?
I think the biggest thing to take into account and do first is prioritize. So, you know, if you're looking at your entire product line or your entire menu, you know, there are probably items that have a lot to do with your brand equity. So if you're McDonald's, man, those fries are key, right? You know, it's number one, prioritizing against brand equity. It's also understanding, putting together like a risk matrix where, you know, just innately some products are going to be more risky. You're going to see more fluctuation in quality. You're not going to have as good of control, possibly, you know, maybe they're imported and you don't get to, you know, have your hands and your eyes on the product as much as you'd like. So I feel like when you start balancing, you know, what makes my business amazing, what builds my reputation, what are my iconic items, and then what items are innately probably going to be a little bit more problematic, and I probably need to look at them a little bit more often. I think that's the first step. And then kind of the first step for specifications mirrors that in the fact that, like, you're right, you can have a specification that's 20 pages long. Sometimes there should be a purchasing specification and sometimes there should be a manufacturing specification. Those are not the same thing. So I feel like sometimes you get the document that's everything and that's just confusing both parties. And I feel like you can measure a ton of different attributes about a product, but there are probably certain ones that very much are like drivers of liking, drivers of quality, that are very important, that are, you know, at the top of your list. And then there are probably some attributes that you don't need to monitor on a regular basis because they're just not as important in the grand scheme of things. And then, of course, there are some defects or loss that you just say, this isn't acceptable. It's a no-go. and I feel like for those items, that's what you're monitoring when you're getting into that supplier relationship. Maybe when you do a first production run, you're having them mock it up for you from pilot to scale. And those are the ones where you say, if you can't get these two things right, we can't go forward. Once you nail down those, those non-negotiables, then you can go forward and start looking at the ones that really drive quality. And it's different for every product. So that's what makes it a really big challenge.
Yeah, you really have to go through that exercise for every product.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
and I always find it fascinating because depending on perhaps the maturity of your product development cycle, right, the way you navigate through this process looks different at every organization. And I think this maybe relates, Sarah, I'm kind of looking at your question as well, because like if we would ask our marketing team, they would be like, well, of course, they're all important.
Right. Yeah.
Even when we would do a risk assessment to say which ones, we always use some terms, Six Sigma terms, like critical to quality, which ones are critical to quality that are the high priority. And it was so hard to get agreement. And then when we would go to ops and we would talk about like, well, which ones are we measuring? Because some things the quality team would measure, some things the operation, right? Operators would be doing some measurements as well. And trying to figure out like how, like which ones need some of that oversight. And Sarah, I'm not sure if I'm capturing part of your question here, but you talked about kind of a risk assessment on these things. How do you even go into some of these conversations with these different teams to even get to that point, to be able to navigate through like which ones really are important? How do we come to some agreement? Because I think, Sarah, like you say, sometimes the data doesn't always set us free.
Right.
Yeah.
And I know that's a really long, massive question that's loaded, Gil. So
yeah. So Sarah, I feel like to your question, I think, in a lot of discussions, we just don't understand where the other team is coming from, right? Or the other department. So for me, I always feel like it's useful to say, hey, I see that in your department, you're looking at color and viscosity and particulate matter, let's say. Why are you guys looking at those three characteristics? And sometimes, and I feel like this happens in every type of production environment, not just food. Sometimes you're looking at those things because those are the things that we measure on all the other products we make. Yeah. So we're just going to do it on this new one as well. And maybe it's time to like just take a pause and say, well, is it a good use of everybody's time? Are these meaningful numbers? If you get a bad number, what is the range? If you get something out of spec, what does that mean? Does that mean you rework the product? Does it mean it's turned into dog food? Or is it something where you go, we're going to note this and we're going to keep going? And I feel like having discussions around maybe why and how they use their data, and then sharing, if you're seeing that something else should be a priority, saying, well, I was actually kind of focused on looking at, XYZ because to the consumer, this is going to translate as a sauce that's too watery. Or, this doesn't really match our brand standard because we advertise ourselves as, rustic and homemade with large chunks of tomato or whatever that is. So I feel like sharing the background, sharing the why, often kind of works through some of those kinks. And I feel like too, pressing somebody to say, when you get an out of spec value, what's your corrective action? Is there a corrective action? And if there isn't one, then I feel like everybody can maybe start to think about if that's something they want to carry forward on the next set of analysis.
Yeah, I think those are really great points. I've also run into situations where marketing or even R&D wants product to look a certain way, but we can't manufacture it to standard. So there was one time we had a product and they wanted clear separation of the bottom and the top, have a clear separation, no mixing of this product. And it was impossible to do after the product was made, because, you know, people shove boxes right in on this truck and they slide around. And so what we did is we actually set up a study with R&D. We had some people come down. We set up a study and we checked cups at certain spots. And we realized that even by the time it made it into its case at the case packer, the layers were already starting to mix. And that just kind of opened their eyes to say, okay, we can't do it with our current setup, with this current equipment, right? We don't have the ability to live up to this quality standard. And that helped us rewrite some of those quality standards to say, okay, it's not really important. We don't see any complaints, right? Where there's something that we monitored afterwards just to see if the people care about it, right? Didn't see any complaints, didn't see any, you know, things when it comes to consumer insights. And then it just kind of went away, right? Mm-hmm. But I think that goes into exactly what you were saying, in the sense of understanding why do they value this piece of it? And then let's walk through and see, can we do it? And if we can't do it, what do we do? Are we throwing away every single, you know, cup by the time it don't even make it out the door and there's some mixing? And the answer is no, right? So maybe that's not as important as we thought it was when we first started the conversation.
Yeah, I just encourage people, like, invite them to walk in your shoes, invite yourself into their shoes, you know, go see it from their perspective, because you're probably both going to learn something at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Well, and thinking about specifications are such a critical transition of a voice of a customer who's just like, oh, I want it to look like this, taste like this, feel like this, to a technical characteristic. Like that translation isn't so easy, which I think is also keeping in mind that, right, it's almost sometimes like we're grasping, like, oh, I wanted to have this type of, like you said, maybe texture, but it's hard for them to describe, to be able to accurately capture that into, well, what measurement do we do to understand that?
Right.
And so I think that also blends to, or leans to, why it's so important to have the conversations and to bring multidisciplinary people in who can help, like, really be translators in that space.
Yeah. And making sure you have your manufacturer there, right? Because I think sometimes we miss.
Maybe.
Well,
I think it's a balance, right? Voice of customer, voice of process. Sometimes voice of process likes to trump over here because we can't do that today. So I love that idea. Sorry, jumping in, being really opinionated here.
Well, you know what? But I think it's important to have that balance, right? Because there's so many times that we're trying to run down this path of, we want to do this, but really your manufacturer can't do it. Right. Or we're running down the path of manufacturing because it's easier, right, to do it this way, or this is the way that we've always done it. But we're not stepping into the spot of like, well, we're trying to create a new product. We're trying to hit a new space. We're trying to hit a new consumer, or we're trying to answer some questions or answer some wants of our consumers. That's the space we're trying to fill in. So it really is understanding all pieces of it. And what I found is, like, having people at the table and discussing those things to say, like, yes, that's something that we might be able to do in manufacturing. These are things that we need, or I know it's going to be a little bit tougher or different, right, than what you've done, but this is why. This is the growth that we'll see. This is the amazing product that we're trying to put forth.
Yeah, and I think so. To the thought of, like, that spec is the translation, right? So you're taking voice of customer, you're giving it to a product developer. Product developer is going to make that gold standard and then try to translate it to quality assurance. And I would say there's even one step further than that, because there's something to be said for, like, understanding what to test for, what metrics you're going to look at. And you can do, you know, all of the sophisticated sensory science to understand that crispiness or that crunch of what the consumer wants and be able to test it. But then you've got the person who's doing the hard job of going out to the line every 15 or 30 minutes, taking a sample, and they don't have the time or really the resources from where they're standing to do that sophisticated test. So then how do we translate that sophisticated, you know, metric of quality into something that can be done on the fly, so we know if we need to stop the line and adjust.
Right.
And so that's kind of, I always think like that's the last part.
Yes.
We all get too sophisticated and too, you know, high and mighty in our white coats as scientists. Sometimes it doesn't translate to like that quick read that we all need at the end of the day to release product.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Really great point. You know,
Yeah.
Gil, I have a question around, I'm kind of curious on your viewpoint here. We talk with a lot of small businesses, and a lot of times they're looking for a co-packer or, you know, a manufacturer to help them make their product.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're going into these relationships, and many times they haven't really thought through a robust specification.
Mm-hmm.
They've kind of gotten into these situations where this manufacturer is making their product, but maybe quality dips and now they want to have a conversation or they want to talk about price, right? But they really don't have this paper, right? The specification to say, this is how you should be making our product and this is the standard of our product. What would you say to a small business that is either in business right now with a co-packer or looking to get into business with a co-packer, and they're trying to decide, do I need a written specification?
So I would start with a conversation. You know, if I was looking at maybe 2 or 3 different co-packers, start with a conversation about what products are similar to mine that they've made before. So let's say I'm making, you know, like a 7-grain cracker. You know, what other salty snacks have you worked with before? How do you measure the quality of those products? You know, and I would, if I said, you know, something that's really important to me is the amount of poppy seeds on the top of every cookie or cracker, you know, how are you guys going to monitor that? Talk to me about that. Or I want them to be this very specific golden brown shade. How close can you get to that? And how often will you be there? You know, and just kind of put the ball in their court to say, you know, these are the things that I value. And if I see complaints on these, if I see these quality descriptions, you know, kind of fall out of favor, you know, you guys tell me, how are you going to look out for it? What, you know, how are you going to monitor it? And honestly, I mean, co-packers with good experience in a food category should be able to start detailing some of those, you know, some of those answers. And that really, I feel like, is somebody starting to build a quality assurance spec for a product, or at least a quality monitoring program for a product.
Yes. Okay. I think that's great because, you know, they're starting to think about that, right? Like, how do I even start this conversation? And many times they're not, you know, they're not a scientist, right? They might have a culinary background, or, you know, they might just love making food with their grandma, and now they want to produce this product. So having that knowledge and starting that conversation is important.
Yeah, and I would say something that we do that we can advise on in making that leap from this beautiful, amazing specification to what kind of standards can I show the quality assurance person that's walking out to the line every 15 minutes. When we do those translations, we think about what standards, what physical things can I give the person and can they have on hand that are commercially available at a normal grocery store. So if you think about, you're going to make an Alfredo sauce, let's say, you probably, viscosity would probably be something that would be a key quality indicator. You don't want it too thick, you don't want it too runny. So how do you have something on hand that's easy, that's cheap for the quality assurance person to kind of compare to? So let's say, you know, they're not going to have a Brookfield viscometer there. They might have a Bostwick, maybe, maybe not. But if they don't, you know, can you say, I want the consistency of my Alfredo to be, you know, the gold standard would be 2 tablespoons of mayonnaise and 1 tablespoon of water. Or if you have a sauce with more, like, let's say more texture to it, you know, is it the texture of tomato puree or is it the texture of applesauce?
Yeah.
You know, and just being able to go to a store and pick up those 2 things and go, well, these are vastly different. Okay, I need to be in the middle of these. Or, you know, just thinking about what you can, somebody can always get their hands on, you know, what can you modify? Maybe you need to water down the mayonnaise, but you can give them a really simple, quick recipe that they can whip up at the beginning of their shift and use as a standard that they have their hands on the whole day.
That's such a great idea.
Yeah, I think that's huge, because I think one of the factors that tends to get in the way of being able to know how to measure things is because, well, one, we're not maybe familiar with what the measurements are, but then they are expensive, or they're more technical than we can have on the fly in the plant for like real-time data measurements. So I think that's a fantastic way to go. How do we still give people the tools so that they can be successful on our behalf? That's awesome.
Absolutely.
Yes. And I think even the conversation that you talked about, where leaning into the values, like what's important about this product, whether it's, a small business owner, or even thinking about what is the brand promise that we have around it. So Sarah, I see when you talk about like, how do you get people in the room to do that? And it sometimes can be challenging. And I think because we're often focused on our technical speak, when we bring those things in, like what do we value here? What is it that we want our consumers to value, or what will they value about it? Will that perhaps bring those people into the conversation differently and really invite them from that standpoint? But it opens the door then to perhaps some more technical speak as well.
Yeah. That's a really great point. Even as I think about, projects I've done in the past, when we've had this kickoff, really like a project kickoff, and we have marketing, or we have R&D, someone really explaining like, what is the value of this new product and why is it important? And, what happens when the consumer bites into it, right? And like, that's what's important to it. In manufacturing, when I was the manufacturing support, we carry that through testing, we carry that through to startup, and even we carry that through months and months and years down the road, where it's like, nope, this is exactly the product that we're making. So if it's missing or crunch and it's supposed to be crunchy, operators on the line is saying, timeout, something's not right, because there's not a crunch. And when we started up this project, we said that is the value for the consumer. And so under making sure that all parties understand that piece, and that might not be technical at all, like have a crunch, right? Have, consistency of applesauce, taste great. These are some other brands that might have something similar. Being able to relate all that together almost gives people like their marching orders on like, okay, yes, this is what we're supposed to do. This is the feeling we're supposed to have around this product. And that's so much more than, what's the value of the viscosity, or what's the, like what's the actual color description, that you're, holding up product against. It's so much more than that, than to say, okay, it's supposed to create these feelings, this type of value to us as consumers.
Yeah. And I think too, if you think about it, the operators on the line, manufacturing, quality assurance, they probably have never seen or looked at the transcript from the focus group that marketing did way up here in the product life cycle, right? And you haven't seen somebody's face either light up or completely fall because they were like, oh, this cookie's like sandy. Now I'm just, I need a glass of water, And I feel like sometimes if we can relate those direct, literally show them the focus group footage, give them the transcript. It helps people understand a little bit better. And then Sarah, to your question about like communicating, I guess one thing that I've learned just about communication in general, we always laugh and say, like product developers are really in a hard spot because they have to receive feedback, but nobody wants to hear their baby's ugly. And so, I'm somebody who would easily walk into somebody's office and be like, hey, I want to ask you some questions about this, and da-da-da-da-da. And sometimes that's too much for the person. So one thing that I try to do just in communication in general is like, slow down. Let me just send an email over that says, hey, Tia, I'm really excited about this cracker. I know you've been working on it for months. Passion project of yours. I want to make sure we get it right. I'd like to come over tomorrow and have a discussion with you about quality metrics and quality drivers. I'm probably gonna have a lot of questions for you, and I'm not questioning like what you've been doing for the last 9 months. I just need information so I can get it right the next 9 months going forward, and give that person like the solid 24 hours to like sleep on it, not kind of feel attacked. I know that's a bit strong, but sometimes it's hard when we talk about products and somebody's worked on it for so long that it's very personal at that point. So
it is weird. Passion, right? Like you want people to have the passion working on on projects and on products. So that means that there's a little bit of attachment there.
Oh yeah. I mean, we've even talked about that with programs we've worked on or processes, right? I mean, you've put so much blood, sweat, and tears into that it's the baby. And whether it's a product or whether it's a program,
right?
How can we approach it with kindness?
Right. Exactly. And I think that kind of flows into the next point we wanted to talk about, which is like, what happens if things go wrong, right? And you're not hitting your quality attributes. And so we kind of talked about setting the clear expectation, right, around the specifications. We kind of need some expectations on what happens if there is a quality issue. What happens if you're outside of spec?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, especially, for maybe a new or a small business owner, that's just like, you're going to get sweaty having that conversation, you don't know how to handle it. And so I feel like even if you've just had that brief discussion with the co-packer about like, what are you guys going to be looking at? How often are you going to look at it? All of that, you can kind of say at that point, it's not a me versus my co-packer conversation. In my opinion, it's if we were together in the same room, that's me and the co-packer sitting on the same side of the table with the spec in front of us, maybe the product in front of us as well, maybe some library samples if they had kept any that were out of spec, just to be able to sit there and say, listen, buddy, we're a team, and here's our spec. Like, how are we going to get there? Let's talk about, what is achievable on your side in manufacturing, what's reasonable, because maybe we were a little ambitious out of the gate. So, are there specification parts where we can loosen them up a little bit, where you guys aren't throwing away half of what you're making? And, are there other parts that we can look at in a different way that's going to make me feel better about my product being produced the way I want it to be produced? So I like those conversations of like, the spec is our project to work on. It's not a battle that we're going to have back and forth.
Yes. Really great point. That just speaks to the relationship that you have with your co-packer, but even internally, right? If you're manufacturing, that speaks to the relationship between product development and the plant, right? The facility. Because we all own a piece of this process.
Yeah. And I feel like there's always, we always say there should be like a healthy tension between sales and production, or marketing and production. And I think that's true, because everybody kind of has their lane they're functioning in. We all have our goals, and not that it's competitive, but everybody has their own priorities.
Right.
But at the end of the day, if we're all working for the same company, it's all the same company's name on the paycheck. Success is really what we're going for here. So, big picture, let's sit down together and figure it out.
Yeah.
And I feel like too, for small businesses that are going to look at a co-packer, have that disaster conversation up front. If you say, okay, this is great. Let's go ahead and talk through what happens when the crackers are purple instead of this beautiful golden brown. What happens? How do is there rework? Who pays for this? Is it destroyed? Can it be sold for scrap? I feel like you can go ahead and just say, for the sake of an exercise, let's assume the worst. Can we talk through this? And you can do it when nobody's under duress, and ask questions, when you're thinking clearly, rather than in the moment when you're just, hot under the collar.
Right. Absolutely.
Oh my gosh. I love that advice. And thinking about like, we did a little bit of that, but how much more we could have done, because everybody wants to be like here between our specifications, and hopefully like nicely in there, not all one-sided. But like, how far outside of that is maybe this sounds crazy, but right, we've all run into this. It's out of spec. Is it still okay? Is it saleable? Is it going to not deliver on the brand? Is a consumer really going to notice? Is
Yeah.
it create a performance issue? Is it, what do we do with it? Is it not mainstream consumer, but can it go to a different stream? And would we want to do that for our brand?
Yeah.
All of those I think are so powerful to have ahead of time, because they, well, one, when you do them in the moment, it's often firefighting
Right.
and it drains the energy. But have you found, or like, what are your tips for even diving into that further? Like, do you typically even kind of present it in a specific way, or what
I
have you
feel like
found
a lot of
works?
those conversations, like specifically the conversation of, is the customer really going to notice? And that's one that, I mean, I don't know how many times a day that's said, but it's a lot.
Right.
Oh, woo.
So,
Yeah, fun. I used to have, I knew of a place where the owner was like, it has to be like this because I can tell it's different. And I was like, nobody else can.
Right.
And it's always interesting in those conversations. So I'm curious a better way to have those conversations.
I mean, I feel like it's gonna happen, right? I feel like often those conversations are not had until the product's been out for a little while, because obviously you wanna see if you're gonna have a high frequency user group.
Right. Yeah.
And the minute that you realize you do, where there's enough data out there to say, like, this group of people is in love with this product, they are high frequency users, they, repeat consumers. Once you kind of realize who those people are, I think then that's when you can do some alienation testing. And alienation testing is exactly what it sounds like. So I'm going to take my high user group, and they're so used to seeing my product, right? They know it better than I do, probably. And how far can I change different quality attributes and that group of product geniuses doesn't notice? And then, and it's called alienation, because if I go too far, guess who I'm going to alienate? I'm going to alienate the people that buy my product on the regular, and I don't want to do that. So I feel like these conversations, they come up because you kind of have a quality, defect, or you're veering off course. But they also come up when you may have a very a product that's very popular with a certain demographic, and you're wanting to expand the target audience for it. So you're going, well, how much can I change it where these people are still going to like it, but I also get the interest of these people over here? And so that's another time you do alienation testing. So I feel like it's kind of like a maybe mid-life cycle. I don't know if you can really do it at the beginning, because you haven't really seen the people that gravitate to your product and buy it over and over again.
Yeah, really good points. Then too, if you own a product that's been around, and you have done that testing, that helps you make even better decisions when there is a quality defect. Right. I like to, when I worked at the plant, I like to take my time on quality defect issues that happen with product, mainly because, right, like, everyone's like, it's quality. Do we have to throw the product away? Right? Like, that's a good conversation. But sometimes I like to just, one time I had a packaging quality issue where I used to work in yogurt and for Yoplait, and we had chocolate whips, and on the packaging was a piece of chocolate. And the packaging was just a darker chocolate. It was kind of off-color, darker chocolate. And so, the line saw it, stopped it. We put a little bit of product on hold. And I'm thinking, like, does that really matter? Like, would that matter to the consumer? And I just had a few cups sitting on my desk. I was kind of thinking about it, right? And I had someone walk by and say, oh my God, what is wrong with that yogurt? And I was like, well, I guess we're donating that product,
A clear sign.
It was a clear sign. Literally someone who worked, have the product, walked by and was like, oh my God, what is wrong with that yogurt? And I was like, well, technically nothing. It's just the packaging. But, it kind of gave me some time to kind of think about it, put it out there. Many times I had, people taste it, in my workplace. And, someone had, I worked on Go-Gurt, and there were a few people that literally had like kids palettes, and so I'm if I bring it to a meeting and they're like chowing down on it, I'm like, it's going to be fine, right? Like it's going to be fine. They don't notice anything, with the product. And so I would do those little like tests throughout, because then it's more than just me, right? Like it's more than just my viewpoint, how I feel about it, because I was like, it's just packaging, right? But you really do have to get a subset of people. And sometimes we'll rope in R&D to say, hey, what do you think about this? Taste this. What do you think about it? Because they understand the brand in a different way.
Yeah. And I think too, depending on what you're creating the product for, you could be benchmarking against something that's already out there, right? I mean, you could be creating a private label version where you want to be at quality, quality parity with the national brand, and then always win on price because you're a private label. So I feel like too, if there's the ability to benchmark on a similar item, it might be one of your own or it might be a competitor item. That also might give people a little jump start to, putting together a spec or thinking about what's important, in the sale of their product.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah, that's a big part as well. I mean, that could be a whole nother show talking about benchmarking externally about products and where it falls versus where you think it falls and how it's marketed and branded differently.
True.
It's so much in there.
Oh yeah.
Yes. Wow. Okay. All right. I think, let's see, because originally we talked about like some different factors or some different areas we wanted to make sure we covered today. What have we've touched on a lot. What have we maybe missed, or what are you like, here's something that the audience definitely needs to know yet?
I mean, if we're thinking about quality monitoring and we're talking about these specifications being a handoff, right? It's how R&D is going to communicate to manufacturing and to quality what they think the gold standard is. I feel like in small businesses, when you're going to use a co-packer in private label product lines, or in massive restaurant chains where you have 300 suppliers that are all making either ingredients or finished products for you, there's not only the use of that spec document to communicate expectations, but also the communication of expectations of the partnership that you have with the company. So a little bit deeper to talk about, okay, we're going to set up a quality monitoring program. As a supplier of mine, you're going to participate in that. So whether that means, you're going to ask for their quality assurance data to be shared, whether you're going to ask that they send samples to a facility for outside testing, maybe they're going to send it to your facility for, a product cutting on a regular basis. Whatever that is really setting those expectations and managing them. And even to the point where, in the food industry, often there's a lot of proprietary information that competitors will not share. But I have seen some of the best quality assurance professionals in the business say, all right, you want to supply us with chicken. As a chicken supplier, you are going to sit and come with all of our other chicken suppliers, and we're going to talk about what makes our cut hard. How do you handle the marinade, not being applied evenly, and we have, a spicy filet that's spicy on one side, not spicy on the other. And I expect you all to talk. And that may mean you're going to talk to your competitor, and you might have to share a trick or, a way to fix a problem, or admit that you have a problem in front of your competitor.
Yes.
So depending on the level of buy-in and the level of participation that you expect out of your suppliers, far beyond them actually making the product for you, those are all considerations that they have to take into account, right? It's going to be money, time, willingness. And so I feel like communicating those early, making a point of why that's going to make a difference in your business at the end of the day. If you're able to monetize those requests to say, in years past, we had an issue with spice level. It cost us XYZ. We don't want to go through that type of loss again. So we put into effect this program, or we put into effect these meetings where we expect trade secrets to kind of be shared and to be leveraged by the entire group. So I would just say really managing the expectations, because if you don't tell them, how are they ever going to know? Right. I mean, that's life.
Absolutely. And I think you really highlighted the necessity for you to have a true relationship with your suppliers, with your co-packers, with the people that's involved with making your product. Because in order for you to have that conversation, right? Like, hey, we're going to get everyone in the room. We're going to talk about the issues we're seeing, or we're going to, that's difficult to do. It's difficult to manage because people do, and I've been in that room discussing a problem, right? With 3 different, companies that's making the exact same thing for us. It's difficult to do, but when you have that relationship, right, and you're working with suppliers that values that relationship, right, and want to produce the best product possible, then that makes it a little bit easier to have those conversations.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like too, if, even saying, if you're not going to have competitors in the room with one another, but even saying like, I'm putting it out to all 7 of you processors to come back to me with your recommendations on the best way to monitor this characteristic. Like, let's workshop this spec. Let's all do it together. Then people feel like they have a little skin in the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
Well, and I love that collaboration, because at the end of the day, you need that if you're delivering on your brand promise. I mean, I have seen situations, you probably all have too, where a supplier or a customer will be like, I'll take it when it comes from this supplier, but not that one. Because they can tell there is a difference in product. And right, as the brand owner, that's not something that's helpful for you. So I love setting those expectations up front, that part of this agreement and this partnership is about being at the table and being part of this together. Huge. Yeah. And I love the recommendation of outside testing when needed.
Yes.
And understanding that, because here's the thing, no matter how perfect our systems seem to be, there can be drift that we're not even aware of. And it's always nice to have, right? We're in quality. We know we check the checkers. We check the checkers who are checking. So there's, what are the systems you have in place? And not every product, not every characteristic, but which ones are the ones that are really critical, whether that's for a customer, maybe acceptance, maybe it's a monetary, a financial thing. I mean, there are so many things that could be part of that decision, but I think, so often we're like, well, we already do that testing in-house, so why would we send it out? Well, there are a plethora of reasons why that can still add value. So I encourage you to, explore what that means and how it can support your system. And sometimes, I'm on the soapbox, I guess. Sometimes it's the optics. It's sometimes having another validation from a third party that says, yes, this is still on track. Yeah. So those things are really important as well. Love it.
I agree. Okay, I have to ask this last question, because we run into this being in food safety and quality, right? I'm sure people listening to us, we run into this. If we are struggling with food safety and we're having conversation with food safety and we feel like even our food safety culture is not where it needs to be, is there room for focusing on quality? Should we even have conversations around quality if I feel like, as a person that's trying to champion food safety and quality, but food safety is not where it needs to be? Is there room for quality? When do I start the conversation about quality?
Good question. I guess it's another one of those balancing acts. So my graduate school mentor always said there are only 2 things that matter in food. One is laws and one is money. And then you can kind of take that and extrapolate it into, well, we need to be selling safe food, right? But we're not going to sell it if it doesn't taste good. If it doesn't match or exceed expectations, I'm not quite sure why we're in business, right? So I feel like it's a little bit of chicken and egg, to use a food pun. I feel like they have to go hand in hand. And I feel like also there are more formalized systems for that nowadays. When you look at like SQF, where quality can now kind of be looked at like a HACCP plan, where you're going to say, if these are our defining moments, if we, what are the most likely things that could go wrong? What does that look like in the finished product? And you kind of work backwards through your supply chain, right? On the quality side, it can be very systematic, and it can go, in my opinion, right along, a parallel set of tracks with safety, because you're thinking about what could happen along the way, how are we going to prevent it, and when we still get close to something happening or something happens, how do we fix it? Mm-hmm. So I don't feel like they can be separated. There may be times to focus on one more than the other, just because of how many hands you have to do the work or budget. But I do feel like I feel like you can't ignore either one.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really great answer. And I too believe that, they work hand in hand. And if you're having conversations around food safety, right, that's a conversation. And then you should also bring along, how are you having controls around quality, right? And what do you do? And it's really the same type of questions, even on like, what do we need to do? What's our standard? And what happens if something goes wrong?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Very, very true.
Well, and I think it also goes back to the culture, right? We know food safety culture is a subset of bigger culture, but there is the quality culture as well. Mm-hmm. And I think this is part of that challenge as technical leaders. How do we lean into different conversations? So if we notice, gosh, we're struggling in food safety and we're always focused on quality, as a leader, how are you stepping up and changing the conversation and bringing that forth? That is part of our responsibility. And sometimes it's hard. Don't get me wrong, right? Been there, where there's organizations, it feels like they don't value the food safety side as much as the quality side, because quality is typically, right, I'm going to say more tangible. Like they can see it. It looks bad. It feels bad. It whatever, versus some of the food safety things. But that's part of our challenge and why we're here.
Yeah. So. Yeah. What makes our jobs complicated, right? Mm-hmm. And Jill, to your point, like not being afraid to stand in that space and have those conversations. Mm-hmm. When we kind of talked about competitors getting into a room and having a conversation, I managed that conversation when I was very early into my career. And luckily I had someone on the supplier quality side that had been there, and someone on the sales side that manages the relationship there to help. But I was the only, quality resource in the room, and it was nerve-wracking. But when I think about the work that we do today through Catalyst and really thinking about building technical experts into technical leaders, if I had some of that confidence of like knowing how to influence and how to talk to different people, right, and to even recognize like what do they value and what do we value and how do we bring that to the conversation so that we can communicate, right, and not butt heads. And the conversation went fine, but just thinking about if I had some more of that knowledge, right, really what more could I have stepped into and been a part of more of the solutions even into the future, if I had that knowledge, right?
Yeah. Ooh. And Michael, I love your comment about tracing quality in the supply chain after manufacturing. Mm-hmm. Once again, that's a whole nother conversation. So Gil, we might have to have you back on. Yes. That's a whole nother aspect.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot after it leaves that manufacturing facility, but you don't want it to be an unknown. Totally agree, Michael.
Absolutely.
But until that happens, Gil, can you tell people, like, how can they reach you if they have questions about quality, expectations, like all the things?
Yeah, probably the easiest thing to do, foodimproved.com is my website. On there, you can book time with me if you want to have a chat. Phone, email is on there as well. So foodimproved.com. You also find my podcast. You can always check that out if you want a little entertainment as well. And then always please reach out on LinkedIn, an active LinkedIn user. We can connect that way as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you. It has been such a pleasure having you on with us today, and just lots of nuggets of information about how do you approach specifications, especially if you have, we all have partners, whether it's our suppliers or whether it's co-mans, however that looks. So
absolutely.
I loved it.
Thank you for being
here. Ladies. Thank you.
All right. Well, next week we'll be back here, same time, same place, but we'll have Jim Miller of Saldesia, the food safety goddess, here to talk about setting people up for success with the right tools.
Yes, we are excited about that conversation. So join us again next week.
Yes. Until then, be well.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.